my name is Steve Rennie. I am the Ren Baron. Welcome to my Ren Baron Learning to Fly YouTube channel. A while back, I posted a video called Ren Baron Confesses My Worst 10 Minutes as a Pilot. And sadly, that video happens to be one of the most popular ones on the channel. And while today's video might not wind up being as popular, I think it represents my best 90 minutes as a pilot, and I'd like to share it with you. For all the viewers here on the channel that are interested in getting an IFR rating, I think you're going to find today's video very helpful. On today's flight, I'm going to be flying with my son Evan from Henderson Airport in Las Vegas, Nevada to Santa Monica Airport here in Southern California. Along the way, we're going to be flying through the full gamut of IMC conditions, including wind, rain, turbulence, and icing. Now, if you watch any of my videos, you know most of them are 3 or 4 camera views. Today, we're going to only have 2 views, over the hood and just at the instruments. That wasn't the plan when I started, but that's how it worked out. So there'll be no ATC audio along the way, so I'll be providing a blow-by-blow commentary of everything that was going on in the cockpit based on my recollections and just reading the instruments. This is definitely my attempt to turn lemons into lemonade, and I think it turned out pretty well, and there's a side benefit as well. I know from reading the comments on my videos that there are lots of Cirrus pilots, brand new pilots, people that are waiting for delivery of a brand new Cirrus or people that are transitioning into Cirruses. So for months now, I've been trying to figure out a way how to turn these big manuals, all 600 pages of this, another 600 pages of this, into videos that kind of chop those books into little pieces. I think the best way to do that is to show how all those systems work in context, not just in a book, but how they work in the real world. So I'm going to spend some time explaining all the systems that I'm using and give you a little dive deep down into all that happens and how they work. So I hope you'll enjoy it today. Come along for the ride. Okay, let's start with our IFR clearance. We were cleared to Santa Monica. On departure, we're going to fly a heading of 170, then radar vectors to the Creso intersection, then Victor 538, then Golf Foxtrot Sierra, then Hotel Echo Charlie, then direct Palmdale and as filed. We're going to be flying 7,000 feet out of the box, 10,000 feet in 3 minutes. Our departure frequency was 118.4 and our squawk was 4671. And here's what that looked like when I programmed it into ForeFlight. As you can see here, the as-filed part of the clearance was a direct to BOGET, which is the intersection for the Kimmo 3 arrival and then into Santa Monica Airport. As we pick up the flight, you can see that we've reached our cruising altitude of 10,000 feet. Our speed at this point was 127 knots indicated, 151 true airspeed, and we were doing 137 knots over the ground. You'll also note that the plane is pitched up a bit, around 5 degrees, as the autopilot is trying to hold our 10,000 foot cruising altitude, indicating to me that we were fighting a little downdraft at this point. As we get a little further on in the flight, you'll see that that speed actually drops a bit and then recovers to a normal speed as the plane levels out. The scoreboard at the top of the PFD indicates that the active leg is Creso to Golf Foxtrot Sierra. Our desired track to get there is 169 degrees, which is indicated on the PFD, on the HSI, and also on the MFD in the data fields at the top. Right now, our HSI cross-track error is indicating that we're about a mile and change left of our course. But if you look at the autopilot scoreboard at the top of the PFD, you'll see why. If you recall, our IFR clearance included a vector to join the Creso transition. So as you can see here, we're in heading mode, flying 190-degree heading. You'll also note that I have the autopilot armed for GPS mode. Once we reach the correct course, the GPS will take over and fly the active leg. When we took off, the winds were blowing at 15 knots. Now at 10,000 feet, you can see here that they're blowing at 32 knots from the southwest. In addition, you'll see here in the lower left corner of the PFD that our outside air temperature is 33 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you look at our data link weather page on the MFD, you'll notice that NexRad is showing precipitation in the area of Santa Monica. So put together near freezing temperatures with a little precipitation, and you've got some prospects for icing, and you'll see how that plays out in a bit. But before it does, I'm going to turn on the anti-icing system on the switch panel. We'll talk more about how that system works a little bit later. Okay, one final thing before we get started. If you look in the bottom right corner of the PFD, you'll notice that's where the flight timer is. Now, interestingly, it doesn't actually measure flight time as defined by time in the air. It actually starts when you turn on the avionics. I mention that because the actual time of our flight from Henderson Airport to Santa Monica was about an hour and 35 minutes, and I won't be showing all of it, but I'll likely reference it along the way to give you a sense of where I made an edit and how much time has actually elapsed in between events. Okay, that's the setup. So now I want you to put on your foggles or pull down your hood and let's do some instrument flying. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that our altitude is kind of shifting between 9,900 and 10,000, and our speed is actually dropping. And as I mentioned, it's because of a very stiff wind that we're facing as we climbed out. In fact, you can see that we've actually pitched up a little bit above 5 degrees, almost to 7.5, which is our takeoff pitch. So that's something I'm going to keep my eye on until it stabilizes. And as strong as that wind is right now, I notice on the MFD that once I make that right turn at Golf Foxtrot Sierra, it's likely to get even worse. One of the most important lessons I've learned as an IFR pilot is to stay ahead of the game and anticipate what's next. So now I turn my attention to what's the weather going to be like at Santa Monica Airport. To find out, I'm going to push the FPL soft key, push the FMS button in, scroll down to the KSMO waypoint, and press enter, which will take me to the waypoint information page. From here I can find out just about everything I need to know about Santa Monica Airport, including the last reported weather. Right now Santa Monica is showing overcast at 4,200 and broken at 1,800 feet and then broken again at 1,000, which if that holds up means we're going to be doing an instrument landing at Santa Monica. Let's fast forward the flight a couple minutes and see what's changed. First off, we can see that the temperature has dropped from 33 to 25 degrees already. Our plane is stabilized at 10,000 feet now and our speed is increasing. And the winds have gotten a bit stronger as well. And so with the temperature now below freezing, I decide to activate the ice light so I can identify the ice on the wings a little bit more easily. And when you're flying in the clouds with no visual reference, being able to see without your eyes is hugely important. And the Garmin Perspective Plus system does some amazing things to help you. In addition to watching those needles come together on that old reliable HSI, you've got synthetic vision, pathways, and a moving map as well. And all of them point to the fact that we're about to intercept our airway, and the GPS starts to flash, and GPS will now start to track that active leg. I want to stop the video here for a second and talk about the anti-icing system on the SR22. There are 5 different modes of operation on the anti-ice system. When you turn the anti-icing system on, the default mode is normal. In the normal mode, the system will pump TKS fluid in 30-second increments. 30 seconds on, then 90 seconds off, then 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off until you turn the switch off. As you can see here, we've got the anti-icing system on. The system is in normal, so let's take a peek outside and see what's going on. Well, as we anticipated, it looks like we've got a little ice forming on our windshield. But the good news is, because we turned on the ice system early, the fluid is flowing nicely and breaking up the ice, so it's not going to be much of a factor. And with that little bit of anticipation and preparation, I'm feeling pretty good about the next hour and a half flying through the clouds. Okay, let's skip ahead a couple minutes here and talk about amendments to your route while in flight. As is often the case when you're flying an IFR flight plan, ATC will sometimes give you some amendments to the route to either steer you around obstacles or in this case to save you a little time. And that's what's happening here. Instead of flying direct to Golf Foxtrot Sierra, we've been given an amendment to fly direct to Hotel Echo Charlie. So to make that happen, I'll press the FPL soft key, scroll down to Hotel Echo Charlie, hit direct enter, and let nav take us to the waypoint. And once the plane turns in that direction, of course, I'm going to take a peek at the weather on our data link weather page to see what we've got in front of us. And it looks like we're all clear to the next waypoint. Let's take a minute and talk about the map panning feature on the MFD. Pushing in on the range button on the FMS puts you in map panning mode, which is a terrific feature to explore all kinds of things on your MFD map. Right here, my son is asking me what these shaded areas are on the MFD, and the way to find out is by scrolling in there and putting the pointer button inside one of those areas, and then it pops up a little window telling you exactly what you're looking at, which is a great and powerful feature to understanding charts while you're in flight. In addition to identifying airspaces along the way, if you look up in the top left corner of the map, you can also determine distance, bearing, and elevations at specific points along the way. Now, I find myself poking around quite a bit when I'm flying on cross-country flights, particularly when I'm flying over areas of elevation or mountains. God forbid I ever lose an engine while I'm in flight, but if I ever did, I want to know exactly how much elevation I have between my current altitude and the flattest piece of dirt I can find along the way. One of the things I've learned about flying is that you have a lot of time on your hands between takeoff and landing, so best to put it to good use. So right here you'll see that I'm loading the frequencies for Santa Monica into COM2. First the ATIS into active and then tower in standby. And then once I get a little bit closer to Santa Monica, I'll put the COM2 in monitor mode so I can pick up the ATIS along the way. Okay, I'm going to let you pull up the hood for a minute and take a peek to see what's going on outside the plane. And as you can see, the anti-icing system has done its job. We've got no ice on the windshield, so I decided to turn off the anti-ice system for now, save a little TKS fluid for later.
They're all looking good. One of the old greats, Richard Collins, always used to say, an engine will tell you before it quits. If you're paying attention.
If you know what to look for.
If you know what to look for, yeah.
That bit of advice from CFI Jason Miller has stuck with me, and so now I make it a point to monitor my engine readings every 15 minutes or so in the hopes that if something goes wrong, I can get to it early rather than late. I also find that it's a great way to keep your mind engaged on a long cross-country flight. If I've learned anything about the weather since I started to fly, it's that it can change on a moment's notice. Less than 5 minutes ago, I was turning the anti-icing system off, and now I'm back in the clouds again, turning the system on. And what do you know? Less than a minute later, we've got ice forming again on the windshield. But as you can see here, the anti-icing system is doing its job and the ice is not sticking, and that's good news. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I always have that iPad Mini 4 loaded with ForeFlight. And the reason is pretty simple, it's dead easy to use. Right here I'm checking for icing along our flight plan, but I use it for so many other things as well. Everything from flight planning to checklists to fuel prices to frequencies, you name it, and I use it. But one of the things I really love about it is the ability to store all those flight manuals. Using ForeFlight probably adds 10 pounds of usable weight to my Cirrus. Clearly on this flight I've got icing on my mind, and it makes a huge difference when I can just reference the manuals here on my iPad rather than having to moke around in the cockpit trying to find a big thick book and paging through it as I go. If it was up to me, I'd build a statue to the guys that came up with ForeFlight right next to Orville and Wilbur Wright. That's how good I think it is. Okay, we're about 20 minutes into our flight right now, and if you look outside, it looks pretty good, a lot of blue sky. But if you look over at that MFD, you see that we have potential for icing all along the way, including a bunch of pink stuff over by Santa Monica, which is of concern to me right now. All of that pink stuff you see over on the MFD on the weather page is telling me that we have the potential for super cool liquid droplets. And while I'm not sure I could tell you everything you need to know about icing, what I do remember about SLD is it equals clear ice, and that's not good, and so my radar is up right now. So I switched the anti-icing system to high, which is going to provide us 200% flow for as long as that button is pushed down. It's going to give the wings a nice solid coat of TKS fluid before we hit that SLD potential. We're going to fast forward about 3 minutes now, and you'll see that the anti-ice system is back to normal, and I'm checking the TKS fluid levels on the engine page. The tanks hold about 4 gallons per side, and right now you can see I'm about halfway there. So to conserve TKS fluid now that my wings are covered, I'm going to turn it off for a while. Okay, here's a quick tip for all you Cirrus pilots about how to read those weather maps. Just press the little soft key that says Legend, and it'll give you a brief overview of everything that you're seeing in there, which is very helpful, I find, because there's a lot of stuff going on in that plane, and you're not going to remember it all. All right, we're about 45 minutes into our flight now, and we're turning for Palmdale. Okay, I've got a little cockpit confession to make. I admit that since I became a pilot, I'm absolutely freaking neurotic about checking the weather. If I had to guess, it's probably rooted in my former life as a rock and roll manager. No matter how bright the sun was shining, no matter how blue the skies were, when you're managing a rock band, it seems like the weather could always turn ugly on a moment's notice for no particular reason, and I don't think I've ever gotten over that. And sure enough, as I checked the weather in Santa Monica, the cloud cover has actually gotten a bit lower, which is going to test my IFR skills big time. Let's talk about using the map settings on the MFD. The Garmin Perspective Plus system allows you to display all kinds of things on that MFD map, including things like cities, highways, roads, rivers, lakes, and more. When I'm flying a cross-country trip, I like to keep track of where I am by identifying the major highways below me, and that's what you can do in the system, and that's what I've selected here. And you can also adjust the range at which you want to start seeing them, which is terrific. Another neurotic obsession I have when I'm flying is fuel. I don't want to ever be that pilot that runs out of fuel. So when I'm flying a long cross-country flight, I spend a lot of time looking in that right corner of the MFD up in those data fields to see what my fuel over destination is. Now, I'm likely explaining to my son here that that number changes quite a bit during the flight depending on what our speed is, what the wind is, and so forth. So sometimes when we take off, it's red, and I have to explain to people it's going to get better. But bottom line is I'm checking it all the time. It's my little blue blankie on that MFD. Let's skip ahead 5 minutes into the flight, and we're now 47 miles from Palmdale. When we get an amendment to our route, ATC assigns us to go direct to BOGET. So I go to the flight plan page, I highlight BOGET and hit direct, enter, and now we're turning toward BOGET. And we'll be flying directly into that area of potential SLD activity, so I've got the anti-icing system on in advance. Now, a couple of minutes later, ATC comes back to me and assigns a crossing restriction of 8,000 feet at BOGET. With the flight plan page open, I'll push in the FMS button. I'll turn the large FMS dial to the altitude field, and then I'll use the number soft keys on the FMS to dial in the altitude and then press enter. I'm going to push the VNAV button to arm vertical navigation, and then I'm going to set altitude select to 8,000. Once that's done, a new top of descent is calculated in the VNAV profile, and once we reach that top of descent, the plane will start down on its own. Now that we're headed for BOGET, it's a good time to take a look at the Kimmo 3 arrival. We can do that from the flight plan page by pressing the charts button. Now you'll notice when we did that, it immediately pulled up the Kimmo 3 arrival because it looks at the flight plan and knows what's coming next, which is a great little feature. And as you can see on the chart, once we get to the Kimmo waypoint, we're making a left-hand turn and heading for home. So this is a good time to load the approach for Santa Monica Airport. I know from lots of experience at landing at Santa Monica that we're likely going to get the RNAV 2-1 approach, so that's what I load here. I set in the minimums of 440 and punch it in. Now you'll notice here as I scroll down the flight plan that there are some duplicate waypoints. Specifically, you'll note that Darts is listed twice. That's because Darts was listed as the last waypoint of the Kimmo 3 arrival, and it's also the initial approach fix for the RNAV 2-1 approach. So to avoid any confusion in the system, I like to get rid of the duplicate waypoints, so you'll see me ditching Darts right here. Let's skip ahead 5 minutes now, and I want to show you one of my favorite features of the Garmin Perspective Plus system. It's called Vertical Situation Display, aka VSD. As you can see here, the screen splits and you now have a vertical profile of your flight plan all the way from your present position down to your destination. But what I really like is it also shows you exactly where your top of descent is going to be. Now, as you recall, ATC assigned us 8,000 at BOGET, so you can see right here where the top of descent starts and where we'll reach BOGET. What a great feature. Okay, so I'm going to let you lift the hood for a second, and you'll see we're back in the clouds, so that means we're switching back to the anti-ice, and I'm going high, which is going to give us a continuous flow of 200% to make sure we pick up no ice. After a couple minutes, the plane is covered by TKS fluid and we're starting to get to some openings in the clouds. So I switched the system back to normal to save us a little TKS fluid for a little bit later in the flight. But after a couple minutes, it was becoming obvious that I was going to be repeating this process over and over again. When ATC had given me that crossing restriction of 8,000 at Boget, I'd set up vertical navigation to do that process automatically. Now, if you look in the vertical navigation profile box, you'll see that we still have about 3.5 minutes till the start of our descent. So to get us out of these clouds, I'm going to start our descent a bit earlier by engaging the VNAV direct function. And 15 seconds later, the V-path engages and we start our descent to Boget. And if you look now in the VNAV profile box, you'll see a bottom of descent is calculated for 7 minutes. And sure enough, 7 minutes later, we reach Boget at 8,000 feet and start a left-hand turn into the Kimmo 3 arrival. You'll also notice on the PFD that our VNAV select altitude is switched from 8,000 now to 4,200 feet, which is our initial approach fix altitude at darts. Now you'll also notice on the MFD as we make that turn into Kimmo, we're heading right into an area of precipitation ahead. So things are getting a lot more interesting as we head to Santa Monica. 2 minutes later, we've got rain pounded against the windshield, and we're also starting to feel some turbulence, which is evident on the PFD as you watch the vertical speed go up and down. Now, if you look at the MFD, you can also see that I've pulled back the power to 65% to kind of smooth out that ride through the turbulence. Now, as all this is going on, I'm receiving the ATIS for Santa Monica, which you'll notice if you look in the top right corner of the PFD, you'll see the receiving is on. And so I'm getting the weather right now. And as you recall, I had previously loaded that frequency earlier in the flight. And now that I've got the weather for Santa Monica, I'm going to switch the tower frequency into active, and I'm going to load the ground frequency in standby so that I'm ready to go when I land. And with the rain pounding on our windshield, we make the left turn into the Kimmo 3 arrival, and now we're heading for home. Okay, that's it for part 1. Next week I'll post part 2, which will be our approach and arrival into Santa Monica Airport. I hope you've learned something along the way today. My name is Steve Rennie. I am the Ren Baron, and I'll see you next week.